was adopted into the Navajo family when I was no more than 3 months old from Phoenix, Arizona. I lived in Arizona on the Navajo res my whole life, growing up and learning the language, although I'm not even half or full-blooded. My family dealt with these things called skinwalkers, or skin wearers. The story is about my mother, who was born in the 1950s. When she was small, about 6, she said she used to play with her little 5-year-old cousin on the road while her mother herded sheep with her brother, and her father left on the wagon to get water a few miles down. Her cousin's mother lived near her family, so they had company for the most part. Neighbors lived 3 miles west and 4 miles to the south. I-40, which was about 26 miles to the south also. Dirt roads, and the rural area they lived in was covered in forest, so there was lots of tall pines, cedar, and oak trees everywhere. It's a great place in Arizona, not too far from the New Mexico border, and not too far from Window Rock, which is the headquarters of Navajo land. Anyway, she was playing by the abandoned dirt road. It was just the two of them, far, far away from the house and the main dirt road. They were also past a large number of trees, having the most amazing time by themselves just playing with their dolls. Suddenly she remembers that she smelled something like rotting meat and heard a crunch of sticks and leaves behind her. She looked back towards the large pine tree that was leaning behind her, and under it sat a woman with waist-long, dark hair, peppered with a little gray here and there, who watched them as they played. Wearing a load of sterling silver and turquoise jewelry, she had body paint with black grease that stunk and wore a coyote pelt to cover herself. My mother said she couldn't move and just stared at it as it stared back at her, and by no means was this woman pretty in the least. She was demonic looking, with what could be described as bloodlust in her eyes as they trailed back and forth between my mom and her little cousin. Her little cousin wasn't even aware of it yet because she was playing a little ways up in the mound of sand. Heart pumping and ears ringing, my mom said she was so scared. Her breath felt stolen, and the smell was so heart pumping and bad that she just got dizzy, yet she couldn't move. Finally, she started muttering to her cousin in Navajo, as children spoke Navajo long before English. She said, Vivian, there's something under the tree. There's something under the tree. Run. Vivian looked up, and she saw the lady. Screaming in terror, Vivian burst into tears as the lady watched them, just smiling. Raising a finger and beckoning them to come over, my mom grabbed Vivian and ran down towards the main road, just in time for my grandfather, who was coming back from getting the water with the horse-drawn wagon. Dad, there's something sitting under the tree over there. Something's under the tree. And her father got very angry and immediately yelled at them, Why are you playing way the heck out there? Get in here. And he looked over, and he saw the lady had gotten closer, looking at them. That's a skinwalker. Come on, he screamed, and got back to the house. He went back with the older brothers, but they never found it. There was only one person with hair that long, and that was his cousin, who had no kids and lived 7 miles to the west of them. My mom said she couldn't ever forget seeing that thing. It was a traumatic experience just knowing what could have happened to them if they'd gotten caught by her first. Nothing good at all, that's what. But once upon a time, Navajo skinwalkers were used for good. They were blessed by the holy ones to help the Navajo people. The blessed ones hunted with it, they spied on the enemies with the blessing and on different tribes. They helped defeat their enemies in battle, and they used their abilities to keep out the Spanish from venturing onto Navajo land. This is why there are no missions near Navajo land to this day. They are only towards Santa Fe and parts of New Mexico or Tucson, so on, but never on the Navajo land. It is also said when the Hopi decided to move from their original tribe of the Pueblos, they crossed the center of Navajo land and were targeted by skinwalkers. Many died near Cornfields, Arizona. And to this day, Hopis decide to live in the tops of the mesas to keep away from the ground. Bad blood between the two tribes until recently. But the blessed ones became corrupted by envy and greed. They are now used for one's gain and purpose, to cause fear, death, and suffering for the sake of money, gluttony, jealousy, and fun. There's nothing good to becoming one, and there's nothing good in seeking one out. I was visiting my grandparents out in Shiprock, New Mexico during last October to see family and to go to the Northern Navajo Nation Fair that week. Many Navajo people, including my own family, are very reluctant to speak about skinwalkers because it is believed to attract their attention. However, I grew up away from the Navajo Nation and was very naive about the subject. When it came to skinwalkers, I was an absolute skeptic. My mom used to tell a story of how back in the 80s, when she lived with her siblings and my grandparents, still in Shiprock, but the southern outskirts, it was about how she and my aunt saw a skinwalker just outside their driveway under a streetlight. She described it as a black dog with dirty fur, a twisted noodle-like front leg, and these unnatural eyes with a soft, burnt, orange glow. Me, being my own close-minded, self-doubted every word, but I never said my doubts aloud. But these doubts totally changed last year when I went to my grandparents' house. My family and I had just finished going to the carnival at the Navajo Nation Fair, and we were calling it a night. The house was close enough where we could walk home in just about 10 minutes, so we did. When we got there, it was about 9 at night, where we stayed up until about 2 catching up on family affairs and the local news. It was during that time that I just decidedly opened my mouth to blurt out the question, "Hey, are skinwalkers real?" "Guys?" I asked. "You shouldn't be speaking about that," my grandmother said with almost a disturbed yell in her voice. So she and my grandfather both decided to go to bed, almost immediately. After being scolded by my mom, one of my aunts chimes in with a very cautious tone and says, "They're real all right. Had a few start screaming outside my trailer in Farmington just a few nights ago. Your cousin had nightmares the whole night and woke up crying that morning." Not wanting to push the discomfort any further, we all decided just to go to bed. Now, the trailer home is pretty old, and it was really nice at night, so we slept with the windows open, with screens just to prevent the bugs from coming in. Everyone had drifted off to sleep except me, because my mind was still going a million miles a minute about skinwalkers. And I wondered if I would ever encounter one while I was here on this reservation. As a kid, I was told it was taboo to think about skinwalkers because it can still call their attention. And that's when the shit totally hit the fan. Just as I was settling and finally getting relaxed for sleep, I started to hear something moving outside. I get up from the couch and start wandering over to the kitchen table. In the trailer, all of the rooms have the lights out, so the only visible light that can be seen is from the porch light out front. I was thankful for this because I told myself maybe if it really was a skinwalker outside, then hopefully it wouldn't notice me seeing it. So I muster up the courage and take a quick scan of outside. From the porch light, all I can see is the dusty ground and the vehicles that my family drove along with some old metal trash cans that stood beside the road. Looking for about 5 good seconds, I wasn't able to see anything, so I was getting ready to turn around and walk back to bed, thinking it was just a stray cat or something. Only having taken 2 steps, I hear what sounded like a distorted scream coming from outside, definitely close by. With my fear rising, I look outside again, and there I see it. A coyote-like figure was staring at my direction from behind the cars, just outside of the reach of the porch light, only it looked awfully wrong and gave off an evil vibe just from seeing it. It was gray with very disheveled hair, and a horrific orange-red soft glow came from its eyes. I noped out of there and ran back to the bedroom. It was at this moment I had begun to notice an awful stench in the air that smelled just like rotting meat. I started trying to wake up my mom, who was like, "Oh my God, it's almost 3 a.m. What do you want?" I immediately began in a shaking voice, "There's something scary outside." Then she said, now annoyed because I woke her up, "Ugh, it's probably just a stray animal or something. It's the res. Animals wander all the time at night." She obviously wasn't getting the drift of what I was saying, so I screamed, "There's some Blair Witch Project stuff going on outside, Mom." That got her attention. What? What the hell are you talking about?" she asked. Then we both heard it. The thing outside started making more of its dreadful like screams and started what sounded like thrashing outside on the ground. "You hear that? That's what I'm talking about." So both her and I got back up, looked outside the window, and the coyote thing was making its way to the door. It walked with an odd limp and dragged its back right leg as if it was handicapped. We could hear it start to scratch against the door and make this odd, muffled moaning sound. My mom went and got my dad, and they both started shouting in Navajo all sorts of words, telling the thing to go away and saying it's not welcome here. Well, all this commotion was enough to get the rest of the trailer up as they came out into the hallway. The only thing my mom did was turn to them and said, "Skinwalker," while proceeding to point to the door, with the noises still happening. Apparently, they already knew exactly what to do, as my grandfather got out a handgun from a drawer and a bag of ashes. He coated a few bullets and loaded them into the gun and went straight for the door. Yelling out more Navajo that was too fast for me to comprehend, he swung open the door and fired twice. Nothing. The thing managed to escape before my grandpa could put a bullet in it. "That's the fastest one I've ever seen," said my grandpa. Next thing you know, my aunt and my parents are freaking out about what just happened, saying stuff like, "What if it comes back? What if it comes back tomorrow?" And things like, "It saw us. Does that mean we're targets now?" Afterwards, my grandparents calmed everyone down, myself included, saying we'll all be fine, and we all went to bed. Morning came, and my grandparents called one of the neighbors and explained what happened. Apparently, one of them was a medicine man and used to partake in Ye-Bi-Che's Navajo ceremonies. They were used for healing and curing sicknesses. He came over to bless each family member and the grounds outside. So, today, I'm very convinced that what I saw was a skinwalker. I still plan on going back for visits to the family and to the Northern Navajo Nation Fair. I just adamantly hope that I never have such an awful experience like that again. I decided to join my bestie, Karen, for a 3-day stay at her grandmother's place on the res. Her grandmother lives near a place called Tuba City, Arizona, in the middle of nowhere but surrounded by rural homes. We go to college together, and I was kinda interested to know about Navajo tradition. The first day we stayed, it was pretty chill. Nothing out of the ordinary, but then her grandma, not that old, only about 67, said that a stray dog came out of nowhere and just wouldn't leave. To me, it did act kinda strange, and it was ugly looking. Black, shaggy coat, looked like a mix between a German Shepherd and a lab. That night, we were watching a movie in the living room. They had big windows that looked out in the front where the cars were parked, but it was nothing fancy. With the curtain wide open, the grandmother was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and we were watching the movie. Next to the window is a medium-sized bookshelf where the DVDs were kept. Karen went to put back a DVD that we had just watched, but she freaked out because that stray black dog was staring at us through the window, standing on top of the wood box outside. Not something normal dogs do from my point of view, or hers. Usually, my dog, which is a house dog, scratches the door to be let in. Now, res dogs aren't house dogs, and dogs inside houses are frowned upon in Navajo tradition. They're meant to protect the house and the owner from the outside. The other dogs seemed to stay away from it. Karen opened the door and yelled at it to get off the box, and it ran off behind the shed immediately. We went to Tuba City to get some groceries, and we came back to the house. The dog was nowhere to be seen. Nothing unusual. Grandma went to visit some people, so it was just Karen and I. At about 5 o'clock, we heard someone trying to open the door. Both of us looked out there since there had been no car heard and no dogs barking. Looking out the living room window to the door, and there was this dog, again, trying to open the door with its paws. 2 paws wrapped around the brass doorknob, standing on its hind legs. I thought that was weird, but wasn't really as freaked out as Karen was. She opened the door and chased it off. The grandmother came back later, and Karen told her. The grandma didn't act like she enjoyed what she was hearing, but didn't seem too freaked out. So we got ready to sleep, and we slept in the spare bedroom since it had 2 beds. One window with curtains was opened a little. We turned off the light, but there was a sound coming from on top the roof, like pitter-patter footsteps and scratching sounds and panting. It sounded like it jumped off onto the large plastic water barrel they had. At first we heard what sounded like barking, but as it grew louder, the other dogs seemed to be barking at something also. All of a sudden, something was running around the house barking, and it was no dog. Nope, it wasn't. This barking sounded human. A deep male voice barking like it knew that we knew it wasn't a dog, like that human sounding woof, 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 ruff, arf, just like that, adding the W's, the R's, and the A's, then panting again by the window. This is when we really started freaking out. Karen decided to, in my opinion this was stupid, but she opened the curtains to look out, and there was the stray dog on its hind legs looking into our bedroom, but this time it stunk, and what I thought were 2 black holes in the neck were another pair of eyes where they were twinkling. Think of those ugly, glossy spider eyes staring at you. And the paws were deformed-looking hands with overgrown, somewhat thick and sharpened fingernails. Again, both screaming and shutting the curtains closed, her grandmother came running through the door, and after seeing it, she first grabbed ashes from the fireplace. She loaded 3 shells into the shotgun from under the bed, blessed herself in Navajo, and she went outside to shoot at it. Yelling in Navajo about the thing wasn't welcomed there, and to get the hell out of here, for it to go linger somewhere else. Them both being traditional, the next day they called a medicine man to come over and put cedar in. He prayed over everyone with cedar smoke and an eagle feather blessed in the place. He made us eat bitter herbs called eagle's gall or something, and he gave me an arrowhead. Apparently I needed to carry one for protection and a little pouch called corn pollen. Seems to work pretty well. The medicine man said that the dog was definitely a skinwalker, which in Navajo is a long word, but I call them Yoshis. The body of a stray dog, which was killed by the skinwalker, made an illusion so we wouldn't know it wasn't just a real dog. He said that the Yoshis tend to harm people by using some sort of human bone straw to spit at someone, like spitballs, but only deadlier. And it gets human bones and crushes into them. Doctors can't detect it, but the medicine man that day pulled a piece of human skull out of the grandma's right shoulder. It was pretty big, about 2 inches long and 1 centimeter thick. It was definitely real, and I watched him pull it out of her. That was intense. Now, I've seen those fake shows on television where the medicine man does his fake ceremony and pulls out some chicken parts. This was nothing like that. I was right there. I could have touched it if I wanted, and it was completely real. Every summer, my family and I go up to camp in the Dedham, Ellsworth, Maine forests. It's about a 3-hour drive from my house. The camp itself is about an hour from the nearest town. Now, I've been going to this camp my entire life, as my family owns it, and I've never had an incident happen like this before. I was watching TV in the middle of the night. Both of my brothers and my parents had gone to bed. I heard a noise coming from the kitchen and realized that the dogs needed to go outside to do their business. So I took my brother's 2 pit bulls and my Affenpinscher, which is a tiny dog, outside after turning on the porch light. I walked around to the front yard and I let the dogs off the leash. It's so incredibly dark in the woods in Maine that the porch light really only illuminated the porch and nothing else, so I tried to keep an eye on them. I was momentarily distracted when I saw a loon, which is an interesting wild bird, out on the lake. When I looked back, I saw that the pit bulls were both looking at something in the woods. Now, I couldn't see what it was, but I assumed it was a squirrel or a raccoon. It was then that I realized I didn't see Alfie anywhere. She's an awfully small dog, and she's completely black. I called for her a few times and heard some soft whimpering. Right where the dogs had been looking earlier. I took a couple steps in that direction and I called for her again, worried that she may have gotten her paw stuck between rocks or gotten stuck in a snake hole. Suddenly I felt something moving behind me. I whipped around and looked down, and it was Alfie. She'd been staying close to me the whole time and I just hadn't seen her. So now naturally I was thinking, if Alfie's here, then what's over in the woods? I took another step forward and the pit bulls began to growl. They were slowly advancing and were now on the other side of me, looking right into the blackness of the woods. I quickly picked up Alfie and began to back up very slowly. I'm not sure what I thought was there, but there are lots of animals in Maine, and I figured the dogs knew much better than I did, since I couldn't see anything. Right as I turned around, I heard the most absolutely bone-chilling thing I've ever heard in my life. Coming from the direction in the woods, I heard something or someone call Alfie's name. It sounded almost as if it was trying to mimic me, but it was all wrong. The voice sounded just really distorted and almost seemed like a wail. I freaked out and ran inside with the dogs. I have no idea what was out there in the woods. My camp is essentially a log cabin looking over a lake, and our nearest neighbor, who also is family, lives at least a half a mile in the opposite direction of where this thing was. Normally, I am completely stoic and don't care for superstition or anything like that. I look on backwards stories like these with a sort of bemusement, and have told and been told plenty over the years. But tonight was different. Now, I'm a grown-ass man, but moments ago I just started sobbing uncontrollably and got so nauseous I threw up my dinner. I don't know what's going on, but after reading about some of these encounters, it was like something clicked and I just started remembering. First, it was a little background where I was a weird little kid, but incredibly full of energy and supposedly really smart. I loved spending all day outside, roaming the foothills, getting lost, finding my way home. I was basically totally fearless, and it really pissed my parents off because, of course, they would get worried sick about me if I didn't come home on time or even until after dark. I loved exploring, finding the hidden places and searching for interesting bugs and animals. My parents were convinced I was going to grow up to be some scientist of some type, yet I had a sort of lack of respect for authority, and my constant failure to return on time resulted in some pretty serious groundings. Now, my solution was to stop going out in the daytime and to start sneaking out at night. My nocturnal adventures began when I was about 12 years old. My range quickly increased from the neighborhood to the nearby golf courts, then to the deep woods outside of town. I would sneak out around 12 a.m. and try to be back by 4 or 5 a.m., just before my dad woke up. I would use my morning shower to clean up, then stumble off to school, pretty much like a zombie. Needless to say, my grades suffered, and discipline measures became even stricter. Still, nobody could stop me from sneaking out and having my adventures in the night. This went on for years, and I never felt afraid, Even when the cops were called on me occasionally, or someone shot off a warning round, or when a huge buck stared me down after I stumbled upon a bunch of deer bedded down. I even heard a cougar scream once, pretty close by too. That got the heart pounding, but I never felt true terror. A sort of startled alertness maybe, but the total dark wilderness never held any power over me. I felt powerful and vital, like I was doing something no one else does and conquering something that was unassailable for others. Until one night. Now, tears are coming to my eyes right now, and a chill is running up my back as I type this. I never remembered fully what the event was that made me suddenly, utterly stop my exploration and totally shut myself inside. But reading these stories has seemed to open the door to something truly awful in my mind. I'm going to try and explain what I saw and felt and heard now, and you can draw your own conclusions. It was a very normal, early summer night. Cool, no breeze, clear sky with the stars and moon outshining so brightly that after getting used to the dark, you could make out shapes and shadows fairly well. A perfect night for an adventure. I snuck out with my usual routine and quickly jogged out of the neighborhood and past the golf course. I had somewhere in mind where I wanted to go, and my plan was to head down a dry creek bed deeper into a small valley that I hadn't really been before. Everything was going just fine, and it was exhilarating to be going somewhere new and breaking a new trail. I didn't get very far into the woods that night, though. Total silence was what made me stop. I remember it very clearly. Usually it was quite noisy, with crickets and other insects so loud that it was almost annoying at times. But I encountered an area of complete, dead silence, with only the sound of the breeze flowing through the pine trees. It was so odd and so sudden that I just stood stock still, waiting, how I usually did, for some clue as to what was going on to present itself. Instead, an awful sensation flooded my body, a sort of welling dread that made fine hairs on my arms and legs stand up, and on the back of my neck too. It was electric and torturous, sheer utter terror. Then the scream happened. So close, I thought it was coming from right above me. It was the worst sound I've ever heard in my entire life. It wasn't a cougar. I know what those sound like. It was a long, pealing, horrendous wail full of mind-bending hatred. In that moment, I was sure I was about to die, that I had made a terrible mistake and now I was going to pay the price. Something was moving in the dark shadows of the sparse pine trees right in front of me. Not moving like any animal, not a deer or even a bear, both of which I had encountered before. A lurching motion of four limbs with a shadow the size of a man. It was coming towards me. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. Every nightmare a child has ever had about a monster chasing them while they couldn't run away was coming true. After that scream, everything was quiet. It wasn't making any noise as the movement came towards me. No crackling of dry pine needles, no breathing, nothing. I couldn't move. Tears are streaming down my face now. The terror I put away is coming back. I think I tried to run. I remember fleeing faster than I had ever moved in my entire life. Total silence, just the pounding of my feet and the scrabbling of my hands in the pine needles and dirt and roots. I fell. I remember panting, face in the dirt, knowing I was about to die. I remember the silence coming over me and a terrible chill. I remember the feeling of my bladder loosening and heat flooding down my legs. I don't remember what came after that. When I came to, it was early morning. The sun was just beginning to rise. My only thought was somehow make it home before my dad woke up. And I ran flat out the many miles back home. My dog snarled at me, snapped at my heels as I came back over the fence. It was so confusing because we were the best of friends since I was only a child and just old enough to play with them. I had larger worries, though, because my dad was already up. I managed to climb in through the window to my bed and change. I went to school that day, but they sent me home with a fever. I never explored at night again, and I was never the same. My dogs never acted the same around me again either. I went from an almost too social, active young man to a complete and total social recluse almost overnight. I barely spoke for a very long time, and I almost failed to graduate high school because of it. It was like nothing could ever matter to me ever again. I don't know what happened, but I know something happened. I'm sorry it was very hard to write this with any coherency, because recalling this is completely making me nearly break down again. Till tonight, I haven't cried in almost a decade, and that was when I buried the dogs I just mentioned, when they had to be put down from an old age and infirmity. I don't know what the heck was going on, but I feel like it was very important for me to share this. Alright guys, that's everything we have tonight. Don't forget, click that subscribe, support the channel. If you liked any of these stories, please click the like. Definitely don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss a single episode. I will see you guys in the next one.